A classic Victorian mansion whose halls are roamed by the dead, a remote forest road stalked by a headless horseman, and a weathered old cemetery where ghosts from the past still linger await on this adventure through some of the most haunted places in Missouri. Let's jump right in. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me in exploring some of the most haunted places in the Show Me state of Missouri. Recognized for its historic cities, as the birthplace of Mark Twain, for the forming of our American post system, and for its breathtaking Ozark mountain range, Missouri also totes its fair share of old hill ghost stories and tales of encounters with the otherworldly. Are you ready to get rolling? Our first haunt lands us to the southwest of St. Louis at the popular Castlewood State Park. Castlewood State Park, which is placed in St. Louis County in Missouri off the Merrimack River, is a sprawling and stunning nature expanse offering a diverse range of flora, fauna, and prominent landmarks that, over its usage, has earned a reputation for its numerous local legends and tales of the otherworldly. Historically, lands now holding Castlewood were initially utilized by tribes native to the region, including to the Chickasaw, Illini, Iowa, Kickapoo, Osage, and more, spanning back thousands of years. Much later, towards the end of the 19th century, this landscape would grow in popularity as a nature retreat, and through the 20th century, it was developed as a resort town known as Lincoln Beach. Notably, Lincoln Beach would hit its most popular era through the 1920s, when the Missouri Pacific Railroad would actually run a regular service from St. Louis to the township, with the site hosting around 10,000 visitors on summer weekends. And through Prohibition, the iconic Lincoln Lodge would shift its focus to running a speakeasy that served liquor illegally far enough away from civilization that it actually got away with it. Impressively, at its height, Lincoln Beach would boast various clubhouses, dance halls, general stores, barber shops, ice cream parlors, and more. Unfortunately, this prosperous period was relatively short-lived, and following World War II, visitor numbers would steadily decline as popularity in the automobile rose, which allowed for tourists to explore other places not confined to the rail lines alone. In 1974, Castlewood State Park was officially established, and by the turn of the 21st century, nearly all remnants of the former Lincoln Beach had faded, leaving behind nothing but ruins and crumbled foundations. Rather grimly, the Castlewood area actually totes a high number of fatalities due to activities on the Merrimack, and since June 30th of 2004, there have been a total of 16 deaths right within park bounds, 12 of which that have been drownings. Strangely, out of all these drownings, only one involved alcohol, and this has led to numerous speculations regarding the region being cursed or maybe haunted by the spirits of those who once enjoyed its bounds. In the present, Castlewood offers a range of activities and draws in boaters, anglers, hikers, mountain bikers, horseback riders, and more recently, paranormal enthusiasts. Some of the most famous Castlewood ghost stories dwell on the aforementioned speakeasy, which at the time was known as the Lone Wolf. As local legend has it, the Lone Wolf sat atop an intricate tunnel system that was used to smuggle in booze, and that were likely utilized in other nefarious acts. And near the ruins, which are still visible to this day, visitors report the sounds of a party long since past, instances in which the spectral form of the lodge appears from nowhere, and accounts of something dark and hulking that emerges from the underground tunnels, and that instills pure terror in any who witness it. Additionally, it's believed the spirits of those who have died on the river might also linger, and some tell that after dark, one can still hear their screams emanating from the flow. These shrieks and cries have sounded so real at times that they've actually warranted calls to the authorities and a search and rescue, who always show up to find the area completely vacant. Lastly, a number of cryptid sightings have been reported throughout the park, and include run-ins with Sasquatch or skunk ape, dogmen, and other beasts from native lore. And on to number 2, which takes us to the Missouri-Kansas border to the Vail Mansion. The Vail Mansion, which is located in Independence, Missouri, is a prominent and awe-inspiring classic Victorian manor home that's grown wildly in fame and popularity over its many years, and that's bound, not really all that surprisingly when you just look at this thing, are rumored to host a number of spectral inhabitants and tales of run-ins with the unknown. Historically, the Vale Mansion's history starts with one Colonel Harvey Merrick Vale, who was born in Vermont in 1831, who graduated from the University of Louisville and moved to Kansas City in 1859, and who, with his wife Sophia, finally settled into independence in 1870. Notably, the Colonel was a strong proponent of abolitionism and rallied behind the politics of the Republican Party in Jackson County very publicly. Unlike other mansions we've covered, which were built as plantations and on the backs of the enslaved, Harvey would fund his lifestyle through intelligent investments such as the creation of the Erie Canal and as a partial owner of the Star Mail routes. In 1871, construction of the Vale Mansion was started and wouldn't be completed for nearly a decade in 1881, when the cost was totaled at around $150,000, which today would have been around $4 to $5 million. Following its completion, Vale would grow to be recognized as a centerpiece of social life in Jackson County, and Harvey would entertain all manner of high-profile guests, including congressmen, senators, dignitaries, and prolific local figureheads. Sadly, through the 1880s, Vale's lifestyle would begin to unravel when he was tied to the Star Route scandal, and though trials in 1882 and 83 would both end in not guilty verdicts, Harvey would spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 in court expenses. Subsequently, in February of 1883, Sophia, who had previously been diagnosed with stomach cancer, was found dead in her room from a morphine overdose, in what was suspected as medically induced suicide. Vale would never remarry, and he would spend the remainder of his days within their mansion until his passing in 1894. Following Harvey's death, heirs to his fortune would battle for ownership of the estate for a whole 5 years. Over subsequent years, the property would change hands a number of times. In 1908, the site would actually act as a sanitarium and asylum for a period, and later as a nursing home. For a few decades, it would face demolition, and finally, in 1983, it was purchased by the City of Independence and would undergo a long restoration project. Today, what is known as the Harvey M. Vale Mansion now hosts a historical house museum operated under the Vale Victorian Society and remains open to the public for tours, events, and more. Fitting the bill as our classic haunted manor, the Vale Mansion is absolutely saturated in spine-tingling ghost stories, and those who have braved its bounds have reported doors opening and closing on their own, objects sighted moving around inexplicably, and the constant feeling of being followed or watched. The most famous story surrounding this aged abode tells that the spirit of Sophia, restless over her own suicide, remains, and an entity bearing her likeness has been sighted all across the property, though most usually staring from various windows down the front drive. Lastly, the spirits of those whose lives were claimed while the house was in use as an asylum have been known to turn up occasionally, and some of these specters are described as very unstable and often terrifying in their manifestation. Number 3 lands us in St. Louis proper and has us walking the infamous Bellefontaine Cemetery. Bellefontaine Cemetery, which is located in none other than St. Louis, Missouri, is a public, non-profit, non-denominational burying ground and arboretum that boasts a number of architecturally significant monuments and mausoleums, as well as a range of significant interments that also ties itself to some downright spooky ghost stories and tales of encounters with the inexplicable. Historically, on March 7th of 1849, a banker by the name of William McPherson and a lawyer called John Fletcher Darby would assemble a team of some of the city's elite and would form what they called the Rural Cemetery Association of St. Louis. Notably, during the same period, freestanding graveyards, which were placed along Jefferson Avenue, were both impeding continued development of the metro and were also under suspicion of the now dead miasma theory, which dictated that illness of the time could be spread or even created by gases produced by rotting organic matter. These drivers, coupled with a growing populace, made the idea of starting up a new cemetery a few miles from the city sound pretty kosher, and later the same year, the association would purchase the former Hempstead family farm, which they planned to transform into a burying grounds. While this new graveyard was initially just called Rural Cemetery, after a short while, and due to the fact that the farm was placed along the road to Fort Bellefontaine, it would simply adopt this moniker as well, becoming Bellefontaine Cemetery. Months after its establishment, the association would hire Almer and Hotchkiss for the designing of the yard, and if you followed our New York videos, this is is actually the same Hotchkiss that also designed New York's haunted Greenwood Cemetery. The first burial at Bellefontaine would transpire the following year in 1850. In 1855, the yard would accommodate the interments of several victims of the infamous Gasconade Bridge train disaster, which is actually still the worst rail disaster to ever transpire in Missouri. And in 1865, the expanse would acquire more land for growth, reaching a sweeping 314 acres. In 1909, St. Louis architecture firm Ames & Young were hired to design a new chapel for the yard, being the Hotchkiss Chapel. More recently, in 2009, this chapel was fully renovated and a columbarium was added. In 2010, a lakeside garden and columbarium were established. In 2012, the expanse toted more than 87,000 graves and 14 miles of road. And in 2014, Bellefontaine was added to the National Register of Historic Places. Bellefontaine Cemetery remains open into the present and is popular amongst those visiting the interred, historians, and, in more recent times, paranormal researchers alike. Chillingly, the whole of Bellefontaine Cemetery is believed to harbor countless restless spirits, and those who have braved its grounds or that have sneaked in after dark report intense bouts of vertigo that only dissipate once they've left the property, instances of the yard seemingly changing and of visitors that are unable to find their ways out, and odd wafts of fog that drift the premises and that sometimes linger above specific markers. A large number of graves within the cemetery are a result of cholera outbreaks through the area. Disturbingly, many have detailed run-ins with the full-bodied apparitions of those taken by this ailment, and who manifest as pale, emaciated figures with dark holes where their eyes should be. Easily the most popular ghost story surrounding this old boneyard tells of Hitchhiking Annie. Now, while this legend doesn't pertain to the cemetery alone, it plays a pretty big part of it in the story, so we will probably mention this tale more fully in another upload. But as it's told, since the 1940s, motorists along Cavalry Drive, which leads right up to the cemetery, have spotted a young woman in need of a lift. Shockingly, countless individuals have actually picked this young woman up, after which she introduces herself as Annie and explains that she's having car troubles. But upon reaching the Bellefontaine Cemetery, she always disappears mysteriously from said vehicles while they're moving without a trace. Get ready for number 4, and for a fright-filled drive down the ancient and legendary Bloomfield Road. Bloomfield Road, which is located out of Cape Girardeau in Missouri, is a long and winding route leading from the southeastern portion of the city itself out into the countryside to the west. Its tree-enshrouded length has long been surrounded by ghost stories and classic local folklore. Historically, Cape Girardeau derives its name from the French soldier Jean-Baptiste de Girardot, who, in 1733, established a temporary trade outpost near, with the Cape portion of the moniker referring to a rocky outcrop overlooking the Mississippi River. And by 1764, a community along a bend in the river around 60 miles south of the French village of Sainte Guinevere would officially be titled as Cape Girardeau. In 1799, American settlers founded the first English school west of the Mississippi in Cape Girardeau. In 1808, the town was incorporated. By 1835, the invention of the steamboat caused the populace to rapidly boom, and in 1843, the expanse was reincorporated as a city. Through the Civil War, on April 26th of 1863, the Battle of Cape Girardeau would transpire through the region, and though it was a relatively small skirmish, it was fairly significant in that it brought Confederate General John S. Marmaduke's raid to an end. Following the war, for years, travelers through the area were forced to cross the Mississippi from the Cape, until 1928, when a bridge was completed to accommodate a rising trend in automobile travel. And through the late 1940s, a federal courthouse would be constructed in town, further solidifying its infrastructure. Sadly, towards the end of the 40s, in 1949, a large tornado would rip through the city, killing 22, hospitalizing 72, injuring hundreds, and destroying a ton of property. More recently, in 2003, the aforementioned old bridge was replaced by the new 4-lane cable Emerson Bridge, which was named after former US Rep. Bill Emerson, after which the old bridge was demolished. And in 2008, the city of Girardeau was recognized by First Lady Laura Bush as a Preserve American community for its work in protecting its local historical landmarks. Now, as crazy as this next part may sound, our road in question, being Bloomfield Road, actually predates settlement of the area, and for hundreds, possibly even thousands of years, the route hosted a Native American pathway that followed high ground from the Cape to the south. In recorded history, this route was recognized first as the Old Shawnee Trail, then later as the Cape to Bloomfield Road, and later still as the Big Road. Following settlement up through the 1800s, the road would be utilized by stagecoaches, and preceding the invention of the automobile, it would act as a dirt toll road for a time before being paved over and opened up to the public. With such a lengthy history, it may not shock some that Bloomfield Road is also widely recognized as one of the most haunted routes in Missouri, and those who travel its bounds report odd transmissions and snippets of conversation through car radios, strange lights sighted flitting amongst the trees, and glimpses of monstrous beasts that skirt the roadways after dark, some of which that are described with glowing eyes. Easily the most famous legend regarding Bloomfield Road tells that through one of the area's many conflicts, likely through the Revolutionary War, that a soldier was beheaded either by cannon fire, by a sword, or during an execution, and much like another familiar story from a little nook called Sleepy Hollow, was sentenced, in the afterlife, to ride the road on a black steed in search of his head, or the heads of any foolish enough to get in his path. Disturbingly, this writer has been cited numerous times and by reliable witnesses, and has even been known to chase cars at alarming speeds before vanishing off into the night. Also reported along Bloomfield are strange animals that look like a cross between man and beast, run-ins with ghostly cars that are there one moment and that disappear in the blink of an eye, and the constant feeling that someone or something is always watching from just beyond the tree line. Lastly, another popular story surrounding the road tells of a specter known as Mad Lucy. As it's told, in the 1970s, a young woman named Lucy was taken out Bloomfield, where she was assaulted and then murdered by an unknown assailant or group of assailants. And ever since, her shrieks can be heard through the night, with some telling that she's out for vengeance, and warning that it's best not to be caught out alone when Lucy strolls the street. Last but not least, our fifth and final haunt takes us just northeast of Kansas City to Excelsior Springs' iconic Elms Hotel. The Elms Hotel, which is placed out of Excelsior Springs in Missouri, is a historic resort lodging that's grown wildly in popularity for its long and intriguing history, and its bounds have also earned a great deal of infamy due to their purported paranormal activity and tales of ghostly encounters. Historically, through July of 1888, the first Elms Hotel on site would open its doors as a 200-room resort. A year later, in 1889, a 75-room annex was added, and sadly, after only around a decade of operation, on May 9th of 1898, this initial lodging would burn to the ground in a massive fire. Ironically, on July 31st of 1909, a second Elms Hotel, which toted 300 rooms, would open its doors in order to replace the first. However, unfortunately, after only a little over a year in operation, on October 30th of 1910, this new building was also claimed by a fire. After which, in 1912, a third and final Elm, being the hotel we know today, was constructed under the Elms Realty Company, who, not taking any chances, would opt to design their new building entirely from stone. Through the 1920s and 30s, the whole of the region around Kansas City was considered a wide-open town under the Kansas City mob and crime boss Tom Pendergast, during which time the Elm would profit as an effective speakeasy. In 1922, Elm Realty would sell this property to one Dr. A.S. McCleary, who operated the Kansas City Sanitarium, and in 1925, McCleary would sell the expanse yet again to the Chicagoan Roberts Hotel Company. This business venture was short-lived, however, as in 1932, the American Medical Association would release research disproving the purported health effects of mineral water, which the hotel used in its marketing, and later the same year, the organization would declare bankruptcy, leading to a steady decline. More recently, in 1948, Harry S. Truman would spend election night at the Elm and would awaken the next morning to news of his presidency. In 1956, the aged lodging would be sold to the Sheraton Corporation, who would breathe new life into its old bones. And in 1968, Sheraton would sell the Elm to Gotham Hotels, after which it would remain open until 1971 before closing its doors until 1977, when it was purchased by a group of interested local citizens. Sadly, by 1991, the hotel would once again face bankruptcy. In 1995, the city of Excelsior Springs would purchase the site and would transition it to new owners. And in 1998, the property would welcome full renovations to the tune of $16 million. In 2011, the Elm was closed for another set of renovations that totaled around $20 million. It would reopen in 2012 to celebrate its centennial, and in 2019, the site was purchased by Hilton Hotels, who, by 2021, would set to work on even more renovations. In the present, the Elm Hotel remains open and is a popular stop amongst history buffs, tourists, and paranormal researchers alike. And rightfully so, as over its many years, guests to the Elms have reported strange cold patches felt through the halls, instances of objects sighted moving on their own, and disembodied voices and commotions coming from vacant rooms. One of the oldest legends associated with this aged lodging tells that before its construction, circa 1880, native tribes who inhabited the area revealed to a man by the name of Travis Melion that the site's natural springs held strong healing powers, and Melion, who aided a very sick daughter, decided to give these springs a try. Miraculously, it's told that after bathing in their waters, his daughter was completely healed. And subsequently, another man by the name of Frederick Kigler, who suffered from a leg affliction, would also put this timeless tale to the test, and was also healed. Within a year, 200 houses had sprouted up around the springs, and Excelsior Springs was born. Now, as it's told, these springs were only to be used in dire situations, and the number of people who settled around them is said to have upset whatever natural energy or spirit that fueled the waters. Incidentally, it's believed the landscape is now cursed, a magical malady that some tell was actually responsible for the 2 separate fires that consumed the first 2 Elms hotels. Also reported across the whole of the property are several full-bodied apparitions, including that of a distressed woman sighted pacing various halls, of a maid in a 1920s uniform, and of a man sulking around the lap pool in the basement that's believed to have been killed by the mob through the aforementioned gangster era. Speaking of this gangster era, one of the Elm's most prolific guests was none other than Al Capone himself, who would always show up with a troupe of machine gun-toting guards, and who would host all-night parties where he and his guests would drink and gamble until their heart's content. Ever since his passing, a spirit matching the description of Big Al has been sighted in various rooms, donning a charming smile and a dangerous glint in his eyes. Thanks for joining me on this journey to some of the most haunted places in Missouri. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. Pleasant dreams.